They had long believed the data was corrupted. For thousands of cycles, the archivist Ictharian Prime cataloged the history of countless species across the Orion Arm. From the peaceful bloom cycles of the Myron to the slow-rise oxygen revolutions of the silent Lidhari, every record was neatly filed, analyzed, and stored. Patterns always emerged: civilization, conflict, unity, decline. The spiral of life, predictable, quantifiable. Then came the capsule from the Sol system. It wasn't even expected. Earth had been classified as dead world 343 centuries ago, presumed sterilized by internal conflict and environmental collapse. A forgotten corner of a backwater spiral. But the signal had arrived unencrypted, riding the remnants of a defunct relay. Contained within was a fragmentary data core of human origin, archival in nature, tagged for long-distance recovery. It had survived eons of vacuum, drift, radiation, decay, and it still worked. When the first archivist read the contents, it requested a psychological reevaluation. The others thought it an exaggeration, but as more deciphered the logs, their skepticism withered. What was inside that capsule shattered every model they had ever built. The file labeled Pre-Atomic Historical Summary began with images that none could believe were factual. Bipedal mammals, armed with sharpened metal, clashed in tribal warfare. Spears, fire, blood. These creatures didn't merely hunt to survive. They hunted each other for land, dominance, or even belief. The Myron once squabbled over mineral rights, but this was different. The humans delighted in it, celebrated it, ritualized it. Then came evidence of empire. Humans didn't stop at survival. They organized into nations. These nations grew, swallowed others, consumed landmass after landmass. From chariots to crossbows, catapults to gunpowder, the evolutionary art of human conflict rose not with reluctance, but with fervor. In every era, they created new ways to dominate each other. The names blurred together: Rome, Qin, the Caliphate, the Mongol Khanate, but the trend was unmistakable: expansion through violence. The Ctharian analysts cross-verified timelines. One empire burned libraries and crucified dissenters. Another razed entire cities. An especially efficient conqueror rode horseback across half a continent, leaving pyramids of skulls in his wake. To the humans, this was legacy. They carved their history into stone, glorifying the bloodshed. The alien scholars debated how such a species had not collapsed into oblivion. Then they discovered religion. The violence did not abate with civilization. It evolved. Humans developed complex spiritual systems. These systems were not inherently violent. Many preach unity, kindness, love. But as with all human constructs, they became weapons. One set of doctrines declared holy war against another. Entire continents bled because two factions disagreed on metaphysics. Inquisitions, forced conversions, theological purges, each justified in the name of a higher ideal. It was not conflict born of resource scarcity. It was war over the intangible. One Ctharian sociologist simply stared at the holographic record of the Crusades and said nothing for 3 rotations. In most advanced species, trauma acted as a societal inhibitor. Violence decreased as intellect expanded. Not so with humanity. The archivist noted a paradox. Human innovation accelerated in times of war. Where others developed medical advances through shared knowledge, humans invented anesthesia in response to battlefield amputations. They discovered flight in a race to drop bombs from the sky. They decoded the atom, not for energy, but for weapons. The age of industry did not bring peace. It mechanized destruction. Humans developed rifles that could fire dozens of rounds per minute. They created artillery capable of vaporizing buildings from miles away. They formed alliances, then betrayed them in global wars. In one cycle alone, designated World War I, entire nations mobilized the trench lines, where millions perished in mud, gas, and machine gun fire. And yet, that was not the apex. That came 2 decades later. The records from the Second World War were so monstrous the Ctharian initially rejected them as wartime propaganda. But cross-confirmation with human cultural artifacts proved otherwise. A species had developed ideologies that categorized others as subhuman. They built death camps, engineered industrial genocide, and as the war raged, the humans invented a device capable of splitting atoms. They used it twice. The archivists replayed the thermal signatures. A single bomb incinerated a city in seconds. One detonation. Thousands of lives gone in an instant. Yet even more chilling than the act was the response. The humans, after witnessing such power, did not recoil. They studied it, refined it, and built an arsenal to end their entire species 1,000 times over. When asked why, the human records responded with a single term: deterrence. It was the Cold War, a period of indirect conflict. Humans had created a scenario so terrifying that their only method of avoiding extinction was mutual assured destruction. Instead of abandoning the path of violence, they balanced on the knife's edge of annihilation. Generation after generation. Nuclear silos, submerged warships, orbital payloads. They lived with apocalypse ready at a moment's notice. But the violence didn't stop at nation-states. The archivists found logs of civil unrest, revolutions, assassinations. Leaders fell to bullets, bombs, poison. Even as technology advanced, bringing medicine, global communication, and artificial intelligence, humanity never shed its taste for blood. Organized crime operated entire city blocks. Gangs formed micronations in megacities. Terrorists hijacked aircraft, detonated in marketplaces, and recorded all for ideological broadcasts. Even their entertainment glorified chaos. Humans created visual simulations of battle. They made plays, films, and games where conflict was not just common, it was central. Heroes were defined by kill counts. The more dramatic the explosion, the higher the acclaim. Children grew up with stories of warlords, assassins, and rebellions. Yet even here, the complexity deepened. Their narratives did not shy from the horrors. They embraced them, dissected them, understood them, and yet they survived. This is what disturbed the archivists most. Not that humanity had walked through darkness, but that it had emerged again and again. Every species studied by the Ctheran had breaking points. Plagues, environmental collapse, cultural disintegration. But humans adapted, no matter how dire the circumstances. They suffered world wars, and then they built an international body for diplomacy. They endured famine, and then they revolutionized agriculture. They polluted their skies, then invented clean energy. Even in catastrophe, they found momentum. They debated for weeks whether to release the data to the greater galactic community. Ctheran Prime was no longer alone in reviewing the human archive. Within rotations, data packets were relayed to linguistic cores in the Terran Sector Quadrant, decrypted further, and uploaded into the Galactic Histories Collective. Initially restricted, then quietly leaked, the files ignited a wildfire of inquiry and disbelief. Dozens of species responded with skepticism. Some accused the Ctheran of fabricating the records for academic notoriety. Others declared it a psychological weapon, an elaborate fiction designed to destabilize fragile interspecies harmony. But the logs were irrefutable. Language cross-comparison, time-stamp triangulation, environmental resonance. The story of Earth was real. The Council of Peers called an emergency session. Representatives from over 75 civilizations attended, each assigned to study a different segment of human history. What emerged was a tapestry none could have predicted. It wasn't just violence. It was innovation in chaos, invention through suffering, cohesion under pressure. The humans had turned adversity into a strategy, and that realization scared everyone. A historian from the peaceful Lyrene Confederacy reported her findings on the siege of Leningrad. She broke protocol and wept during the presentation. 11 human rotations of starvation, freezing temperatures, and constant shelling, yet they held. Civilians boiled wallpaper for sustenance. They wrote symphonies. One man played violin as bombs fell, because silence meant surrender. No Lyrene colony had ever lasted more than a cycle under siege. A military analyst from the Growltalk Dominion described the Battle of Stalingrad, detailing how humans fought room by room, floor by floor, through frozen rubble. Reinforcements arrived across a river under enemy fire, again and again, refusing retreat. Snipers turned ruins into death traps. The city did not fall. The Grautalk's greatest campaign involved 10,000 troops. Stalingrad buried 2 million. Even death wasn't deterrent enough for humans. One particularly unsettling file showed accounts of soldiers advancing after being shot. Medics used tourniquets and field stimulants to keep men alive long enough to return fire. Amputees returned to the battlefield. Pilots crash-landed, crawled out of burning wreckage, and rejoined the fight. To humans, the line between dead and done was blurry. Then came psychological warfare. A scholar from a Terran unity presented data from human conflicts where misinformation, deception, and propaganda turned the tides more effectively than brute force. They created ghost armies, fake divisions of inflatable tanks, and decoy broadcasts to fool enemy commanders. They forged documents, manipulated alliances, seeded rumors among populations. In one case, they used captured enemy equipment to sow chaos behind hostile lines, posing as friendly units and dismantling command structures from within. The Terran were masters of logic. This kind of emotional manipulation was beyond their comprehension. And it wasn't just war. Human espionage operated in peace as easily as in battle. Their intelligence agencies infiltrated governments, undermined political movements, and carried out silent regime changes. Their cold conflicts were as brutal as open war, just without the fireworks. Diplomats in the chamber began to ask an uncomfortable question. If humans ever reemerged in the galactic stage, what side would they take? What terms would they honor? What would be their price? A record labeled Operation Paperclip deepened the uncertainty. After the Second World War, opposing human nations competed not just to win, but to exploit the minds behind enemy weapons. One side captured enemy scientists responsible for mass death, offering them sanctuary in exchange for innovation. It wasn't morality that guided post-war strategy. It was utility. They weaponized brilliance. Technology wasn't developed linearly, either. The files showed sudden leaps. Rockets designed for annihilation soon became the vessels of exploration. A missile 1 decade, a moon landing the next. Medical techniques invented to save soldiers during war became civilian standards. Trauma yielded progress. Catastrophe, then enlightenment. The philosophers in the chamber were silent. No existing species showed this pattern. More unsettling was human adaptability in crisis. From natural disasters to societal collapse, humans display behaviors that defied biological instinct. Instead of panicking en masse, they often organized spontaneously. Total strangers rescued one another. Civilians formed volunteer brigades. In the aftermath of tsunamis, bombings, and quakes, they didn't scatter, they converged. They ran toward the problem. The Voth Syndicate's representative, whose species evolved from prey animals, found this behavior incomprehensible. The instinct to protect others at personal risk wasn't just rare, it was suicidal in evolutionary terms. And yet, in humanity, it was culturally reinforced. Honor was assigned not to survival, but to sacrifice. Human literature was studied next. It was where the most disturbing pattern emerged. Their myths weren't about perfection. They celebrated the broken, the flawed, the redeemed. Heroes were drunks, outcasts, former villains. Tragedy was not avoided. It was embraced, understood, even revered. They didn't just document pain. They processed it, wove it into meaning. One archivist noted that human poetry during the Black Plague didn't mourn the end of days. It asked how to live better despite them. Then came their darkest experiments. Not every horror was inflicted upon enemies. Some humans turned their intellect inward. The files revealed unethical scientific programs, tests on unwilling subjects, manipulation of neurochemistry, deprivation studies. From the Tuskegee syphilis experiment to MKUltra, human governments had, at times, treated their own people as tools to be bent or broken. Yet the astonishing part wasn't that these atrocities occurred. It was that they were exposed, documented, apologized for, memorialized. Humanity didn't always bury its crimes. Often, it dragged them into the open, demanded justice, and restructured itself to prevent recurrence. Pain turned into policy. They learned, even if the lesson came at terrible cost. One particularly chilling transmission involved a speech by a human president after a nuclear accident. His admission of failure was public, televised, and unfiltered. There were no scapegoats, just responsibility. The chamber grew more silent with each revelation.